They hadn't even finished lowering my grandfather's coffin when my parents filed the lawsuit. Not condolences. Not a hug. A lawsuit. The papers were still warm from the printer when I opened them, each page a weapon, each signature a betrayal. My parents, the same people who'd treated me like an afterthought for 3 decades, wanted everything he left me. And as I stood there, numb fingers clutching their claim, I realized they were finally paying attention, but only because I was worth something now. I used to believe love had rules, that if you tried hard enough, you could earn it. I stopped believing that the day my mother rolled her eyes at me in the courtroom, as if she already knew she'd win. She didn't. But before that morning, before the headlines, the lies, the whispers in the courthouse hallways, there was a little girl who thought she was loved. My name is Clara Weston, and I grew up in a house built from silence. My parents, Victoria and Daniel, lived 2 states away, but they might as well have lived on another planet. They sent postcards instead of calls, posed for holiday photos, but never stayed for dinner. When I was 3 months old, they left me with my grandparents for a few weeks. Those weeks stretched into a lifetime. My first memory isn't of my mother's perfume or my father's voice, it's of Grandma Eleanor's kitchen. The scent of melted butter, the soft thud of her wooden spoon, her laughter when I spilled chocolate chips across the counter. The best cookies always have too much of everything, she'd say, brushing flour off my hair. She was warmth personified. Never sighing, never scolding, just presence. Grandpa Henry, though, was different. A man of precision and discipline, a retired judge with hands that still carried the weight of a gavel. Every evening he'd come home, robe still creased, and ask, "So, what did my favorite lawyer in training learn today?" I'd hold up crayon drawings, and he'd study them as if they were legal briefs. I thought that was normal until I started school and realized everyone else's parents showed up. Soccer games. Plays. Parent-teacher nights. I had 2 empty chairs and one determined grandmother waving twice as loud. When I asked why they never came, Grandma said, "They're busy with important things, sweetheart." But even at 7, I could feel it, the crack forming between us, spreading wider every year. Their visits were rare and rehearsed. Victoria would step inside wearing perfume that smelled like money and exhaustion, kiss the air near my cheek, and spend the afternoon scrolling her phone. Daniel waited in the car, engine running, already halfway gone. Pretending was their favorite family tradition. Grandpa Henry used to tell me, "Justice isn't revenge, Clara. It's just showing up." And he always did, every scraped knee, every report card, every heartbreak. When other kids talked about inheritances, I didn't think about money. I thought about his voice reading law journals as bedtime stories, the rhythmic hum of his old heater, and the way his eyes softened when Grandma laughed. Looking back now, I understand. Love isn't a promise. It's a presence. And absence, it's a choice. So when Grandpa died and the will revealed he'd left everything to me, his house, his savings, everything, it wasn't greed that enraged my parents. It was exposure. The money didn't humiliate them. The truth did. The first real crack between us came years earlier. It was a gray Thanksgiving morning. I was 18, home from college to surprise Grandma. She was in the garden, knees in the cold earth, planting tulip bulbs. "Spring's worth the wait," she smiled. By sunset, she was gone, collapsed between the flowers she'd just planted. I found Grandpa hours later, still holding her gloves, whispering her name into the dirt. My parents arrived late to the funeral, left before the reception, and never called after. That was the day I stopped making excuses for them. After that, Sundays became sacred. Grandpa and I cooked together, his famous roast, my awful cookies, and talked about truth, law, and how people hide behind appearances. He leaned back in his chair, eyes soft but knowing. "The law reveals who people really are," he told me once. "It strips away performance." I didn't know then how literal that would become. Years passed. I graduated law school, became a prosecutor. Grandpa watched every milestone with quiet pride. My parents sent a 2-line card, "Good job. Proud of you." Their version of love, wrapped in minimal effort. Then, at 87, Grandpa died in his sleep. At the will reading, I expected maybe his watch or a book, something sentimental. Instead, the lawyer slid a folder toward me. Everything. The house in Brookline. The investments. His entire estate. And one letter. "You earned this," it read, "not by blood, but by presence." I didn't cry at first. I just held that letter until my hands shook. It wasn't wealth. It was validation. Proof that someone had seen me. But 30 days later, the storm began. My colleague and closest friend, Andrew, called from the office. His voice was hesitant. "They filed, Clara." "Filed what?" "Your parents. They're suing. Undue influence." I laughed. A hollow sound. "They think I manipulated him? They're accusing you of controlling an old man for his money." Of course they were. Of course. That night, I drove to Grandpa's study and opened the old filing cabinet. There, tucked inside a folder labeled Payments, were decades of bank records, monthly transfers to my parents. Notes he'd written beside each one. Victoria requested increase. Daniel's business failing again. Page after page, over $800,000. He'd known this day would come. He'd prepared me for it. Sitting in that dark room, surrounded by proof of their dependence, I whispered, "You saw them clearly, didn't you, Grandpa?" The anger that rose wasn't wild, it was calm, controlled, judicial. If they wanted a war, I'd show them what justice looked like. They said I looked too calm for a woman being sued by her own parents. Maybe that's because I'd already mourned them years ago. The first hearing was held in the same courthouse where Grandpa once presided. I used to visit him there as a child, sitting in the gallery while he explained why justice mattered more than appearances. Now I walked those same marble halls as the accused, his name engraved on the wall behind me like a silent witness. My parents arrived together, perfectly coordinated as always. My mother's heels clicked like gunshots on the floor. My father kept his gaze straight ahead, jaw tight, pretending this wasn't killing him too. Pretending was their family art form. Their lawyer, a man who smelled of arrogance and expensive cologne, smiled as if the case was already won. "This will be quick," he whispered to them, loud enough for me to hear. I almost smiled back. Quick wasn't the word I'd use. The judge, an old colleague of Grandpa's, scanned the papers and frowned. "Undue influence," he read aloud. "You're alleging your daughter manipulated her grandfather?" My mother's voice was syrup-sweet. "We're simply seeking fairness, Your Honor." My father wasn't well. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was a judge for 40 years, I said before I could stop myself. He never did anything not clearly. The courtroom went silent. Even the fluorescent lights hummed softer. That first day wasn't about winning, it was about seeing them. Really seeing them. My parents weren't grieving children, they were desperate opportunists drowning in their own choices. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet bystander. That night, I went back to the house, the one they wanted so badly. The lights hummed like they always had. His books still lined the walls, his scent still lingered in the old tweed jacket hanging by the door. I sat in his study, the clock ticking like a pulse. The letter he'd left me lay open on the desk, his handwriting neat, deliberate. I opened the file. Andrew called again. "We'll need testimony," he said. Someone to confirm his state of mind. I hesitated. The nurse, Mrs. Torres, met me the next morning at a small diner near the courthouse. She still wore her scrubs, her hands trembling around a coffee cup. He knew exactly what. Wow. Her eyes soft. When she left, I sat still, hands clasped, while they rewrote my entire childhood like bad fiction. When it was my turn to testify, I looked at the judge and said, I didn't replace them. They left. I just stayed. For a moment, even my mother looked uncertain. Outside the courtroom, the press had already turned it into a spectacle. Daughter versus parents, the Weston inheritance war. Neighbors whispered. Former colleagues avoided me. I'd never felt more visible or more alone. One night, after a particularly brutal hearing, I found my father waiting by my car. He looked smaller somehow, the years catching up to him. Clara, he said quietly, this isn't what I wanted. Then stop. He glanced away. It's not that simple. Your mother. Always your excuse, I cut in. You let her set fire to everything and then act surprised when we're all standing in ashes. He didn't respond. Just turned and walked into the dark. A week later, Andrew came running into my office, face pale. They're trying to freeze your accounts. What? Emergency motion. Tomorrow morning. They're claiming you used inheritance money before the case is resolved. Of course they were. Every move designed to suffocate me slowly. That night, I went through Grandpa's files again, desperate for something I'd missed. That's when I saw it, a sealed envelope labeled, "For Clara, if they betray you." Inside was a notarized statement, dated 6 months before his death. In it, he'd written, "I am of sound mind. My decision to leave my estate to my granddaughter, Clara Weston, is deliberate and final. I have provided for my daughter and son-in-law extensively during my lifetime. This gift is not out of influence, but recognition of love freely given and returned." His signature clear, bold, final. I sank into his chair, the paper trembling in my hands. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. He hadn't just trusted me. He'd protected me again. The next morning in court, their lawyer smirked as he presented his motion. "Your Honor, until ownership is resolved, we request the immediate freezing of MS. Weston's assets." "Actually," I interrupted, standing, "there's new evidence." Andrew placed the sealed document on the judge's desk like a weapon wrapped in truth. The room went silent as the judge read. My mother's hand tightened around her purse, my father's face drained of color. "This statement appears valid," the judge said finally. "I'm entering it into record." Motion denied. It should have felt like victory. But when my mother looked at me across the courtroom, her expression wasn't defeat, it was promise. Something in her eyes said, "You think this ends here?" That night, I found the front gate of the house wide open. The security light flickered, buzzing faintly in the cold air. And on the doorstep, taped to the door, was a single envelope with no return address. Inside was one line, typed on plain white paper. "You don't know the whole story." I didn't open the letter right away. I just stood there in the doorway, the cold air slicing through my coat, the house behind me humming with memories that no longer felt like mine. The note was short, typed and signed. "You don't know the whole story." At first, I thought it was another cruel trick, my mother's way of keeping me off balance. But the words pulsed in my mind long after I shut the door. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the floor of the study, surrounded by Grandpa's papers, reading his handwriting over and over. His notes, his will, his statements, all clear, all deliberate. So what was I missing? By dawn, I decided I couldn't ignore it. If there was another story, I was going to find it. The first clue came from something I'd never questioned, a folder labeled Charity Disbursements. Grandpa had always been generous, donating to local shelters and education programs. But one name kept repeating across years of transfers: Rosewood Foundation, a charity I'd never heard of. I typed it into my laptop. No website. No address. Nothing. I called Andrew. "Ever heard of Rosewood Foundation?" He paused. "Doesn't ring a bell." "Why?" "Grandpa sent them money for 15 years. Tens of thousands." He whistled. "That's unusual. Could be a shell." "Want me to dig?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Please dig." By afternoon, he called back. "Found something. Rosewood Foundation doesn't exist. But there's a Rosewood Trust registered under your father's name." The room tilted for a moment. "What?" "Yeah. It's an offshore account. Set up about 15 years ago. Your grandfather's donations? They were being redirected there." My hands went cold. So he was funding my father? Andrew exhaled. "Looks like it. And maybe he found out before he died." I printed every record, every transaction, and spread them across the study floor like broken glass. My mother had always said my father's business was private. Now I knew why. He'd been living off Grandpa's charity. But what if Grandpa hadn't just discovered it? What if that discovery was the reason he changed the will? That would explain the envelope, the look in my mother's eyes, the sudden fury behind the lawsuit. They weren't just angry about money. They were terrified about exposure. The next hearing was different. They were quieter, tighter, their lawyer suddenly more cautious. He avoided eye contact as if he knew what I'd found. After the session, my mother cornered me in the hallway. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "I don't think," I said softly. "I know." Her eyes flashed. "You have no idea what he did." "What who did?" "Your grandfather," she whispered. "You think he was some saint? He ruined everything. You just don't know it yet." Before I could answer, she turned and walked away. Her words stuck like splinters in my mind. "You don't know what he did." That night, I searched through the old filing cabinets again, everything labeled, ordered, meticulous, until one drawer jammed halfway open. Inside was a small, locked box I'd never seen before. The key hung on his old watch chain. Inside the box were two things: a letter addressed to my grandmother, dated 30 years ago, and a single photograph. The photo was of my grandfather standing beside a young woman I didn't recognize, holding a baby. On the back, in his handwriting, "For Rose, 1993, my stomach dropped." The letter was short, trembling slightly at the edges, as if he'd written it in guilt. "Eleanor, I made a mistake long ago. One I couldn't undo. Her name is Rose. The child is mine. I've provided for them quietly through the trust, but I couldn't tell you without breaking us. Please forgive me for the silence I've chosen. Henry." The floor seemed to shift beneath me. My perfect, noble grandfather, the man I worshipped, had a secret family. A daughter named Rose. A child. My mind raced. You don't know the whole story. Now I did. Or at least, I was starting to. By morning, I was on the phone with Andrew again. "There's someone else," I told him. "A hidden beneficiary. Possibly alive." He was silent for a beat. "You mean, another heir?" "Yes. If that's true, it changes everything. The will could be challenged by her, not your parents." "I know," I whispered. "But I need to find her first." He sighed. "You sure about this, Clara? You could win as things stand." "I don't care about winning," I said. "I just want the truth." I drove to the address linked to the old trust paperwork, a small town 2 hours away, mostly forgotten by time. The road wound through bare trees and faded gas stations until I reached a weather-beaten house with peeling white paint. A woman stepped onto the porch as I parked. She looked mid-40s, cautious, but not unfriendly. There was something familiar in her face, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. "Can I help you?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Are you Rose?" She frowned. "Yes. Do I know you?" "I think," I said softly, "we might share a grandfather." Her expression froze, confusion shifting to disbelief. "What are you talking about?" I handed her the photograph. Her hands trembled. "This was my mother," she whispered. "She died years ago. She said my father was gone before I was born." "He wasn't," I said quietly. "His name was Henry Weston." She stared at me, tears filling her eyes. "Then you're your niece," I finished. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. Just stunned. Two lives colliding that were never meant to meet. When I left that day, the world felt different. Everything I thought I knew about loyalty, truth, and love was fractured. But beneath the shock, there was also clarity. My parents hadn't just been greedy, they were trying to bury a scandal that would destroy them. Because if the court ever found out that my grandfather had another child, their claims of being the only rightful heirs would collapse instantly. And they must have known. They'd known for years. That night, I sat in the study again, the photograph in my hands, the note echoing in my head. "You don't know the whole story." "No," I thought. "But I do now. And it's my turn to decide what to do with it." Then, the phone rang. Unknown number. A woman's voice, calm, low, deliberate. "You shouldn't have gone to see her," she said. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a whisper. "They're watching you, Clara. Stop before it's too late." The line went dead. The voice on the phone haunted me all night. I replayed it over and over, calm, female, deliberate. "They're watching you, Clara. Stop before it's too late." But who were they? By morning, paranoia had sunk its claws into me. Every car that slowed near the house made my pulse jump. Every shadow outside the window looked like a threat. I'd spent months fighting my parents in court, but now I realized I was fighting ghosts too. My family's ghosts. I decided to confront them head-on. The next hearing was supposed to be procedural, just another round of motions and delays. Instead, I walked in with a folder under my arm, the kind of folder that could end everything. My parents sat across the aisle, perfectly still, but their eyes tracked me like hawks. Their lawyer looked uneasy. Maybe he'd sensed the shift. When the judge asked if either side had new evidence, I stood. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I'd like to submit documentation regarding a trust known as the Rosewood Foundation, along with a notarized letter written by the deceased, Henry Weston." I could feel my mother's breath catch from across the room. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." I handed the envelope to the clerk and continued, my voice steady but my hands trembling. "These records show that my grandfather, over the course of 15 years, directed funds into a private trust under my father's name. It also reveals the existence of another family, a woman named Rose and her daughter, both supported financially by him until his death." The room went completely still. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment. My mother stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. None of this has been verified." "It's verified enough for a subpoena," the judge said sharply. My father's head dropped into his hands. And that was when I knew she'd known for years, but he hadn't. When the judge dismissed the session, my mother pushed past reporters and marched straight to me. Her voice was low, furious. "You've destroyed us." "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you started lying." Her lip trembled for a split second before she hardened again. "You think truth sets you free? Wait until you see what it costs." Then she walked away, heels echoing down the corridor like the last sound of a collapsing empire. That evening, I found myself back at the Rosewood house. Rose, my aunt, had been waiting on the porch. She didn't look surprised to see me. "They called," she said softly. "Your mother. She warned me not to talk to you again." "Did she threaten you?" "She didn't have to," Rose said. "She offered money." I laughed bitterly. "Of course she did." Rose studied me for a moment. "What will you do now?" "Finish it," I said. "For him, and for us." She nodded slowly. "He visited me once, you know. Years ago. Just once. Brought me a music box and said he couldn't stay long. He cried the whole time." Something in my chest cracked open. "He loved you," I whispered. "I know," she said. "He just didn't know how to love without guilt." We stood there in silence, two women bound by one man's secrets, neither villains nor saints, just collateral of choices made long ago. The final day in court felt different. No cameras this time. No theatrics. Just quiet exhaustion. The judge reviewed everything, the letters, the statements, the trust, then looked at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Weston," he said, "this court finds no evidence of undue influence. In fact, the documents suggest quite the opposite, that Henry Weston's decision was both deliberate and protective." Case dismissed. The gavel came down. Just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. Outside, my father caught up to me in the parking lot. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "About Rose. About any of it." "I believe you," I said. "But you knew what Mom was doing. You let her." He nodded, tears forming. I was weak. "I'm sorry, Clara." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. Just pity. "I know," I whispered. "Goodbye, Dad." He didn't stop me this time. A month later, the house was finally quiet. The court files were sealed, the estate officially mine. But victory felt strange, hollow in places where love should have been. I spent most nights in the study, reading through Grandpa's letters, trying to reconcile the man I knew with the man who'd hidden a whole life from me. He wasn't the saint I thought he was. But maybe that was the point. Maybe love isn't pure. Maybe it's complicated and flawed and human, and that's what makes it real. One evening, I took the photograph of him with Rose and placed it beside the one of him and Grandma. For the first time, they belonged together, truth and regret, side by side. Then I opened the window and let the night air in. Somewhere outside, the wind carried the faint scent of tulips, the ones Grandma used to plant every spring. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name, neatly typed. "He told me you'd find the truth one day. He wanted you to have this." Inside was a single item, a small brass key. I recognized it immediately. It was from the old piano bench in the study. When I lifted the lid, I found a hidden compartment. Inside, a tiny music box rested, the same one Rose had described. I wound it carefully, and a fragile melody filled the room, delicate, haunting, beautiful. Tucked beneath it was a folded note in his handwriting. For whoever finds this, if you're reading, it means the truth has survived. Don't let it make you bitter. Let it make you real. H.W. I sat there until the song ended, tears slipping down my cheeks. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like something softer, forgiveness, maybe. Or just peace. When I finally stood, I whispered into the quiet. I showed up, Grandpa, just like you taught me. And for the first time since he died, I felt him there, not as a ghost or a memory, but as something steady, calm, and proud. Justice, after all, wasn't about punishment. It was about truth finally taking its rightful place.